Hi everybody and welcome to the CSAW 2013 preliminary walkthrough. My name is Swad for Sci4 and we'll be walking through the preliminary evidence from the beginning to end. First, teams would be going to hsf.isis.poly.edu and downloading the preliminary evidence, which will give a file called sdcard.zip. Once unzipping this file using the unextractor of their choice, teams will have a folder called sdcard. SD card contains two files, sdcard.tc indicating that this is a TrueCrypt container, and a hi.txt. Upon running hi.txt and opening it, teams will find a message saying nobody will be able to get into my SD card with my super secret password, in quotes, which indicates that the password is indeed password with a capital P. Upon discovering this information, teams will go ahead and open up TrueCrypt and will be able to mount the SD card .tc using the given password. At this point, it is important to note that I am using Kali Linux, a Linux distro, in order to do this analysis. This will make some things easier in the long run, including file signature analysis, which is performed in the next step. Since the way Linux is set up, it permits files to be analyzed even if their extensions are not there. The only difference in Windows would be an additional step would be required in order to get the file extensions and open the files. In order to determine file signatures, one has to look at the first couple of bytes of data in the file. This would be done using any sort of hex editor. And from that, one would match it to a file signature analysis sheet and find the corresponding extension. More information about this can be found on Sci4, and where there is another module on file signature analysis. Once the TrueCrypt volume has been opened, there are a couple of things important to note here. There is a music folder, upon which, if teams were on Sci4 during the beginning of the competition, there was a Python script for music stego. The stego, if ran against the WAV files here, would pop out a message with audio steganography. There are also pictures with EXIF data, and teams were supposed to note any EXIF data they found on these images. Most important of all in this TrueCrypt volume is a backup plan. As I said, since I'm in Kali, I am automatically able to see this due to the operating system. However, all teams would be able to see this after performing file signature analysis that 010965 is actually indeed a PDF file, and therefore they would be able to open it and identify the next container, which is a website, hsfportal.isis.poly.edu. Now we're going to go ahead and navigate to the new container we've just discovered. I'm over in my OS X machine out of the Linux VM. We're going to head over to hsfportal.isis.poly.edu. And over there we see that this is the HSF ISIS lab website. It's our website that allows all the students in the lab a place to show off projects and whatnot. So we're interested in getting to the Dropbox, as the text says, there's nothing important to see here. From the document, it's indicated that there are some sort of login credentials, which will allow the users to authenticate. So we're going to go ahead and view the page source in order to determine what sort of authentication is being used. And we see that there's a bunch of style wrapping, some divs, and then we can go ahead and see some JavaScript functions being called in order to log in. So for menu clicking, and then there's the check login function here, and we see that the var username is made up of user function 1, and then the variable password is made up of the concatenation of the outputs of password function 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we're going to go ahead and open up a developer's console and try running these functions. We're going to go view page info. We're going to inspect element. console, and just so I have the names overlaid. So it's ufunc1. So we're going to run it with empty parameters. And now we get the username of JHUNKSE, JHunks. That's a mistype of his last name. He was typing it so fast that he actually failed to type it properly. Now we're going to go ahead and call pfug1 the same way and get the first concatenatable string of his password. We're going to call the remaining functions pfug2. See that pfug2 yields a space, so we know that it will be do space pfug3. We see capital E and a V after the space. Finally, we'll call pfug4. We see a 1 and a L. So the final password is do space capital E V 1 L. So we're going to go ahead and try authenticating using these credentials, JHUNKSE, and password capital D O space capital E V 1 L. And go ahead and click login. As you can see that there is authentication, and when I click Dropbox there is a lot of new containers that have been opened up. So the way we got here, just to summarize, is from source code analysis and then running the JavaScript to get the appropriate login credentials. The next container that we're going to be looking at is the IDS file, and it says we have someone called M. It's unclear who M is right now. However, M says they just got their hands on this and now they can figure out how to be more stealthy. Now I'm back in my Linux virtual machine, and the reason for that is if I download a file and it's malicious, I don't want it to mess with my host operating system. Whenever doing forensics or application security or just security in general, it's good practice to use virtual machines just in case you don't know what you're dealing with. Obviously, in the case of this competition, we are pretty thorough with cleansing our files, and we don't necessarily throw in anything that would harm any computers. However, it's just a good forensic practice to exercise when doing investigations and such. So now I have the ids.zip downloaded and I have it extracted. From there we see that it's a ids.pcap format. From there we know that pcaps are usually opened in Wireshark. So I'm going to go ahead into Kali and open up my Wireshark tool. So I'm going to go ahead, and we're not going to be capturing, we're going to be opening up a file. So we're going to go ahead and open up ids.pcap. And here we see a bunch of communications from VMware, from a couple of local IPs, some session requests. We see some TCP packets here and there. We see more TCP packets. So we're going to go ahead and actually filter by protocol just to get everything organized. We see that there's a bunch of SMBs, some server communication. So we could actually go ahead and follow the TCP stream on one of these packets, and we see that there's stream content here from ISIS Bank, which is a machine. So this looks like SMB traffic. Nothing interesting here. So if we look at, right-click the SMB traffic and follow the TCP stream, again, looks like the same data. So if we clear again and go ahead, scroll down a little bit and follow the TCP stream here, we see an actual file. We see some data that are requested here. We see SQL database personnel.db database file being opened. We see a dir command being executed on a machine, and we also see all the contents of that personnel file, the database file of the bank. So this is exfiltrated data, and there's also a text file that was placed in the system called gotcha.txt, and the file contents is a string with the message "looks like your systems isn't too secure" with a emoticon after it. So this is important information that was to note in the reports. So that's all the aspects of the IDS PCAP essentially. So from here, we're going to go ahead back to the HSF portal and go back to the other evidence containers. Now that we've exhausted the IDS, we're going to go ahead and actually take a look at the AVD, since it's the next thing there, ideally be the one to look at. So we're going to go ahead, and we see that it's a file called joelsphone.zip. We're going to go ahead and download it, and we're going to open it up in Android SDK Manager. As you can see, we have Joel's phone, the zip file uncompressed, and we have two files there. One's a .avd file folder containing the parts of any Android image, and the other file is a INI initialization file, which Android SDK Manager and AVD Manager will use in order to emulate the device. So we're going to go ahead and open up SDK Manager as I have here, and we're going to be dealing with the Manage AVDs option on Tools and Manage AVDs. There we'll see Android Virtual Devices, and we'll see that list of existing AVDs located at root and .android AVD. So we're going to open up that location, root.android/AVD, and we're going to go ahead and copy over these two files. Now, in order to get the AVD working, as we'll see, we'll hit refresh, and this has the valid Android virtual device. I'm just going to go ahead and quickly open up the INI here, go over a couple things. As you can see here, that the target is Google Inc. Google API 17. So that just means that API 17 needs to be installed. I already have it installed on my SDK Manager. However, otherwise you would just have to check this box here and install API 17, which would include the Google APIs, and just go ahead and install packages. I'm going to go back to Manage AVDs. As you can see, this is okay for mounting, so we're just going to go ahead and click Start. We could leave the default settings and click Launch. This will be starting the Android emulator, and as you can see, this is the first time I'm running in my VM, which is why I'm getting this message, so we'll just, it's up to you whether you want to do this or not. I'll just uncheck the box since this is for demo purposes. As you can see now, there's a full emulator showing the virtual device, and you actually have hardware controls here. Home button, menu, back, and search for those that aren't familiar with Android SDK. There's also a detailed tutorial on CSAW. If you're watching this video, you're most likely linked from it. Otherwise, the URL is cyfor.isis.poly.edu. That's cyfor.isis.poly.edu. And on there, you'll find detailed instructions on how to do certain things in this video in case you're not familiar or it's not covered in enough detail. For example, this part of how to get the image properly recognized as a valid target, or other parts. So we're going to go ahead and just wait for the... Now that the AVD is fully loaded, we're going to go ahead and swipe to open. We see that it's a typical Android phone. We have the current time and the connection. So we see that there's a terminal emulator here. We're going to go ahead and start investigating by looking at the emails. And within the emails, as it loads, we'll see some information that may be interesting to the case. So we see a couple of messages here. We see some messages from a message from Jim Dibner. See, great success. I declare this a great success. Yes, some might suffer, but in the end, success. This was sent to Mark, Luke, and Moshe Wunsch. There's also an email from Moshe Wunsch to Mark and Luke saying that someone has injected code into our services. It's really bad. I'm running over. We need to stop this as soon as possible. There's an email from LinkedIn. There's a message from Mark that says final steps. So we see a message from Luke to Mark that says Jim's actions have played into our hands. Julian will arrive here soon. Meet me in the back of the lab to deal with him. And we see Mark responding, I will take it that you are sure on this one. I'll be there to back you up. And finally we see a message from Mark saying security engineering projects and declaring that there are no vulnerabilities in ISIS software. We know that this is contradictory to the IDS file because we see ISIS Bank has information that's plummeted out. We see that Moshe has sent an email to the lab managers that the services are no longer under his control. We also see an email from Julian Jacobs saying, be careful. Says that does not know the extent of his current efforts, but he's currently overstepping his bounds. Seems like a warning notice. So continuing on the email thread, there is more information going further. And we see a couple of regular spam emails. So we go ahead and return to the phone menu and go look through the web history. So to hit the home button, go ahead into the browser. Go ahead into the menu. Go ahead into the tabs. Go ahead into the ribbon and click history. It's gonna go into older. HSF portal. We see HSF Casino .isis.poly.edu. That looks like it may be another container. We see an HSF Casino again a couple of times. HSF Casino all over again. And we see HSF Casino once again. HSF Casino. see other security references, CTF, and that ends it. And so we'll go to most visited, which is HSF Casino, all over HSF portals, visited quite often, and that's the end of the history. We'll go to save pages, and there are no saved pages. So from the history, we've found a new container, or website as it looks like, HSF Casino. However, before we're done with the phone, we'll go ahead and just look through the contacts, see if there's anything in the contacts. So we see there are a bunch of no names, and the phone's profile isn't even set up. So we're just going to note this appropriately, that contacts were analyzed. And there's also, just make a note of applications on the device. There are a couple of games. There are mostly games, SMS backup program, Pandora, OpenSignal, and a terminal emulator, which is always interesting to note. So that's it for the phone analysis. From that, we found web history that's going to lead to HSF Casino. So we're going to go ahead and open up HSF Casino in the browser. Open up the Linux browser, and we're going to navigate to hsfcasino.isis.poly.edu, and we see that it's a HSF Games 2013, and it says the Cybernuts present the only gaming site you'll ever need. Try your luck and walk away the big winner today. So we're going to go ahead and look through the games. It says it's an 8 puzzle, arrange everything from 1 to 8. There's Blackjack. It says don't bust, or should you. There's Snake, typical Snake, Quizzy, and Slots. Blackjack seemed to have the provocative prompt there saying don't bust or should you. So we're going to go ahead and actually analyze the page source here. And here we see the JavaScript wrapping for the website. We keep scrolling, see all the scripting. And we actually see a comment on line 52 of the code. Load up Blackjack. Nobody should be reading this. So now we see the Blackjack game, which says don't bust or should you. So we're going to go ahead and view the page source of this. And from there we see that there's the JavaScript standard wrappings. And we also see a comment on line 52 of the HTML code that says load up Blackjack, nobody should be reading this. So we see a script type, JavaScript, being loaded from JS, blackjack.js. And we see the JavaScript internal functions for having the game running. And we see if the player's score is greater than 21, there's a comment added here from MR, Mark Rogers, added in the back door that J Hunks asked for. Hopefully nobody reads the source. So there is more information here. And also it's set to execute if the player score is equal to 35. So the bust amount that would need to be hit in order to get this message to pop out is 35. So only a score of 35 would give this. However, we could get this from source code analysis. So we receive a string that says Joel must have sent you. Click this URL and it continues the game. So we're going to go ahead and continue to this URL. Again, downloading it in a virtual machine. Just because we do not know what it is yet, so we're going to copy it. We're going to paste it. So we see it's a laptop.zip. We're going to go ahead and commence with the download. Now I have the Debian machine loaded up, and if you are unclear on how to do that, I went into the laptop folder after I extracted it from the zip, and I just double-clicked the VMX file. It would be a little different if you had VirtualBox. VMX with VMware makes it a little bit easier. If there are confusions as to how this was done, please view the tutorial on Sci4. As mentioned before, there is a tutorial showing how this is done. So I'm going to go ahead and boot into the Debian, and we'll just wait for it while it does the system checks and boots. So as we see, we have a login, jhunks, username J, and we're going to refer back to the Dropbox for the password. Now we see from the Dropbox that the password is hack, H-A-C-K, for L-Y-F-E, hack for life. We're going to go ahead and log in. Another alternative, if that password was not discovered, although it would be I don't see how a team would be able to discover this without getting the password and following the trail. However, if one were to find this virtual machine without discovering the password from the Dropbox, they could drop the machine into single user mode and do a password overwrite, and that will be explained in a different tutorial on Sci4. So once the VM is booted, teams could go ahead and open up the home folder and begin analysis. So go ahead and look at the desktop, see a file called cookie. This is the cookie that could have been used to manipulate the session ID and actually get into the Dropbox without credentials. There's a cut image here on the top. Something that's worth noting. Going back, there's a whole bunch of files here. Can go ahead and if there are unknown file types, go back to home, go into documents, see a TrueCrypt setup file. There's a phishing database here also that can be seen. If we double click it, we see that it's a CSV of targets that have been phished. So we're just going to make a note of that in the final report. There's also a financials.db. This is info that should be taken into SQLite. In fact, we're actually going to extract the file to do just that. I've brought it into my host OS, and we'll be opening that up in SQLite browser. We'll be looking at the downloads. We see urgent lab status. Zooming in, so we can zoom in there. See a message from Jerry Burns saying that ISIS has been attacked, and we see a message too far from Julian, and Julian says that you may have drawn the hood over the rest of us and he will not stand for this. He essentially threatens Joel Hunks. So going back to the home, we're going to go into MS. We see Nmap. It's an application that's important to note on the machine. Look into music. It's an empty directory. Go into pictures, also an empty directory. We see cybernuts.ods. Go ahead and open that up. And in there we see a listing of members of the Cybernuts. This looks like a hierarchy. Joel is the boss. Mark is under him. Chris is an underboss. And we see different members and their roles. That shows an organizational structure. And there seems to be a file called Twitcher_creds in here as well. So from back in the history, we see that there's a website, hsftwitcher.isis.poly.edu. So that's also another aspect that we can go ahead and analyze. We also have the creds now. Luke.hunks, password, hacker all day. Now we're going to browse to our new container, the HSF Twitcher that we found. We're going to go to hsftwitcher.isis.poly.edu, and we get a web page not available. So it's probably fair to assume that it's an IPv6. We're going to head over to IPv6proxy.net, and we'll go ahead and tunnel to the website, hsftwitcher.isis.poly.edu. Go ahead and select Go, and we'll get a tunnel via proxy. And we see a Twitcher login, CSAW 13, with the registration, and we also have a username and password for login. We're going to use our Luke.hunks credentials from the virtual machine, and password hacker all day. Gonna go ahead and log in. We see a welcome back Joel Hunks, and we see his Twitcher buddies. We're gonna go ahead and look at public twits, and we see a bunch of quotes, public twits. We can go back to your buddies. It's just good to note that there's messages here. These look like encrypted messages via different schemes. So these twits are something that are important to note in the report. So now we're going to go over to our last container. I'm telling you it's the last container, but teams would not know that. However, from the AVD, we also found HSF Book.isis.poly.edu, and also from the web history from the VM. So we see that it doesn't load as well, so we're going to go ahead and tunnel the same way, IPv6proxy.net. And we're going to go on over to hsfbook.isis.poly.edu. I'm going to tunnel to it by clicking Go, and we see latest activity. So now as we scroll, we see there's a lot of activity. We see activity 21 days ago. This should be ignored for this part of the tutorial. This is part of the finals evidence, which was dropped in after the preliminaries. So we'll actually scroll back to evidence that's older than 21 days ago. This is late November, early December when this is being recorded. So the message that's of interest is from Jerry Burns, posted to The Wire. It says, just found some odd activity. Can somebody analyze this for me? and it's another link to HSF CDN with the download code. So we're going to go ahead and click it, and it says that it does not have IPv6 address, so we're going to go ahead and copy and just paste that in and go ahead and download. And we see it's a file called bankram.zip. So we're going to open up our Kali Linux VM. Now that the file is downloaded, teams will see a vmem file, VMEM extension, and for those that aren't not familiar with it, vmem is essentially the extension for a memory dump. Now that we know that the bankram.vmem file is indeed a memory dump, we're going to go ahead and use the tool volatility to analyze it. So in order to do that, you have to make sure that volatility is installed on your Linux distro. It is not on Kali by default, so I've just done a quick sudo get to install it. It's usually pre-installed in IDA, ADIA forensics box. So to begin, we're going to do a vol flag f, giving it the file name and giving it the file path, bankram.vmem, and we're going to give it a plugin. We're going to use image info, which is the first place one should start in order to properly document and find out what exactly they're looking at. This will determine a profile based on searching the image of what type of operating system it came from, the last time it was accessed, when the image was created. So it's important forensics information and should be taken seriously. So this should be ideally the first command that's run when doing memory analysis. So now the results say that the suggested profile is a Windows XP Service Pack 2, 32-bit, and we can also see the image date and time. The creation was on September 17th, 2013, and that was also the time of the image. So now we're going to go ahead and see if there are any processes running on there. So we're just going to use the plugin PS List. And that'll go through and list all the processes that were running on the system at the time of capture. We see some system processes. Looks pretty normal. We see VM tools, CYG run, auto connect services, Chrome, Minty, and we see a suspicious process here, PY keylogger running. This is pretty suspicious considering that there was keylogging going on from the end of PY keylogger from the ISIS guys that was discussed earlier on in the evidence. So we'll definitely make a note of that in the report. We're also going to go ahead and look at connections to see if there's any traffic incoming or outgoing. Seeing that there is no incoming or outgoing traffic, we're going to run the ConScan plugin to see the connections that were just closed right before capture. And we see that there's a conversation here between a local and a remote address, and there's SSH going on. The SSH connection going on, and there's data being transferred as indicated here. So this concludes the end of all the preliminary evidence. At this point, teams would be compiling their reports and get graded for finals. From the SD card, the trail was supposed to end at the memory analysis. Afterwards, the evidence continues with the finals. There will be a finals walkthrough video coming shortly. Stay tuned for that.